So, as always, going to record greetings and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining Global Peace Studies for Sustainable Development in Africa, where we discuss pertinent issues of peace and sustainability around the world and across Africa. I'm George Mutalemwa, moderating this session on behalf of the Africa Peace and Development Network, MAMA. Our theme today is the time of the simplex, how African cultures have prevented autocracy and polarization. And the speaker is Professor Koen Stroeken, who is a professor of African Studies and Anthropology in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Ghent University in Belgium. He was also with us as a participant, and today he's with us as a speaker. It's a wonderful, just a pleasure having you, Koen, and you are welcome to speak to us. We are all ears and eyes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, George, and everybody present. So yeah, my name is Koen Stroeken. First of all, sorry if my voice sounds a little bit hoarse. I woke up this morning with a little, there's a flu around town, and I think I have some symptoms of that already, but I promise not to drop dead before you all. I'm here, I'm alive, almost kicking, and I see there's a wonderful presence again. Like last time when I was a participant, I was really impressed by the quality of the interventions, the intensity, also by the moderator, the whole idea actually of this network, MAMA, so Mtandao network, wa Amani, peace, na Mandeleo, development, Africa, so MAMA, it's as if the word was, I was going to say invented for this network, but it's the other way around. But nevertheless, we all have mothers. I'm not a man. I'm not an African. I spent a lot of time in Africa. My adolescence was in Africa, but still, we all have our own backgrounds. And today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine some of my backgrounds, personal ones, and academic backgrounds to tackle an issue that I think I've been dealing with since the beginning, the very beginning of my research. I wouldn't call it career because it's more by accident that I became professor. Actually, I never intended to become one. I was playing in a band and the band just didn't sell. So the gigs, but it was in Belgium. So if you're in Belgium playing in a band in 1989, then I was born in 1967, then you didn't make money if you couldn't survive. So let's say that it was more out of adventurous spirit that I started to travel in Africa. And then I got frustrated by the fact that I didn't speak the language. I was thinking, what am I doing here? I don't speak the language. I move all around here, but it's like I'm just observing. What if I learn the language? And then I started studying anthropology. I discovered that most, in those days most, but nowadays it's becoming a little bit rare, strangely enough. Ethnography is the method of the anthropologist, so to live with a people, to get to know the language, that they actually learn the language. So ethnographers learn the language, so I did. And I spent 2 years in a village, two villages in the northwest of Tanzania, not so far from the University of George, Mwanza. So most of my time I spent in a small village called Wanzamiso, another one, Nguge, both near Misungwi. And there I couldn't speak English because nobody understood English in 95 until 97. That was my first long-term fieldwork. And Swahili itself was barely enough, to be honest, because people thought of that a little bit as the language of the government, even though most of people spoke it. So, if my intention was to be helpful in any way, no matter what, we can discuss what that can be, but as an outsider, as an expat in that area, northwest of Tanzania, I was going to learn also Kisukuma, which is the local language. So very soon I also discovered that the development project I was part of, which funded me but very little money. I dare not even say it. I have to think in dollars, but in those days it was very little. But yeah, as a young man, it's enough to live. I mean, with little, I mean really something like, so that would have been, uh, now you're going to be shocked, like about $50 a month. Or $100, let's say $100 a month. In those days, you could actually live perfectly. 95, you could live perfectly, but you couldn't have a car. You couldn't drive a car, of course, but yeah. But so anyway, so that was good. That was perfect for me because I just had to become part of the community. That was the first year. That was the goal of my stay. So I had to speak the language. I was good at languages because I'm Belgian, so I spoke already French, German, Spanish, English, Dutch, of course, my native language. So the learning, especially when you're in your 20s, wasn't too much of a challenge, but it was actually the main, let's say, one of the main goals because, I mean, everybody here, whether you studied or you didn't, when you can talk in a language, you always have something to contribute, always something interesting to contribute. So even if you, doesn't matter whether you studied university or not, you had your life, and if you can convey what you experienced in life, that is rich. That creates unforeseen connections between people. So I knew that was going to be the main thing. And so it took me 1 year and a half before I actually dared to speak Isukuma because it's a tonal language and the rhetoric is very elaborate. So the language, when you mispronounce even slightly a word, you sound almost ridiculous. It's not like that in English. English has so many dialects that you accept my dialect, my version, my European version of English. But in those languages that are tonal and that are so specific, um, I didn't dare to speak, even though I worked every day on it like crazy. It's like when I was learning Latin in secondary school, and I fell asleep every evening early because of those words. You had to memorize the grammar, all that you can imagine. So in the beginning, you basically start with talking with children because you don't dare to talk with adults. But let's say after about 1 year and a half, or during which period I did collect data, of course, on stories, and I had a translator, a guide. I kept aloof. I kept my distance. But then when they saw that I started to understand what people were saying and I could participate, they invited me to get initiated. And this has been uh, basically the main contribution, I guess, that I could deliver to academia in those days. That was that I was initiated. I became initiated in the village initiation, which in itself was very interesting because of the symbolism, the rite, the meaning, the rites, the rituals, the meaning. That was also the immersement, being immersed in a group, growing up with peers, people that keep on teaching you since then. Um, and I had the age of everybody around me, so that it just the color of my skin. But after a while, people got used to me as well. After 1 year and a half, you don't make a big deal anymore of that white person, although you like him to be involved in certain things and maybe keep him out of other things. But after a while, yeah, they told me if you want to know more about us, about our society, you will have to get initiated because there's so much we cannot share with you. And you ask questions about medicine, and you ask questions about divination, about rituals, and the things and traditions, and things that we think are important. There's no point without getting initiated. I said, wow. But I learned in books from an anthropologist, books published in Cambridge University Press, that the initiations are done, extinct. With colonization, they have been specifically in Tanzania, not only with colonization, but also with the socialist government, that they were forbidden, basically, because it's religion, or it's even better, it's actually not scientific and not supported by church or by schooling or anything. So that's what we learned, that intervention by the government was quite effective, and also because of the person that Nyerere was. Nyerere was a very inspiring, was the founder president of Tanzania, was a very inspiring man who published books with Oxford University Press, etc. Can you imagine a president who publishes books that are read by scholars by a university press? That's the, or Edinburgh University Press. In any case, that's the kind of president they had, and he had a certain idea about culture and the place of culture, and it was not going to, the place of culture, culture was not going to threaten peace. Culture was not going to jeopardize what he had so well developed in this country, in Tanzania, which was unity. He managed to overcome all the ethnic differences in Tanzania through the concept of umoja, unity, and through the language of Swahili that everybody spoke and everybody was taught in school Swahili. So even me speaking Kisukuma was a bit of a weird thing when I collaborated with Tanzanian development experts who often had studied much more than I did, and they, because they were bioengineers and they intervened in all and participated in all kinds of big projects in Tanzania. And then there was me, and I wasn't even sure about what kind of expertise I had. Anthropology, what kind of expertise that, and ethnography is very specific. You have an expertise in a certain area, but not everywhere, just one area. So, but I did have my convictions based on my experience, and I spoke the language, understood the culture, understood the cosmology that was taught through the initiation. So that initiation I wrote about and I published because, of course, to everybody's surprise, it did exist, and very much so. There were so many people participating, and so many young people that had received it. So clandestinely, in hiding, so somehow staying under the radar was this Sukuma culture, this Sukuma cosmology, was still kept alive, but not openly. And people actually learned to live in two worlds. They pretended this towards the government, like when the development project came, and I was still part of the development project. I actually saw that also, that people did some kind of lip service to whatever the development project said. And then there was their own life, which was not, definitely not purely spiritual or mythological, whatever, of course not, which was day-to-day life, but it had some layers to everything you said, and everything you said had enormous impact, has enormous impact still in those communities, Sukuma communities. So there was an importance of what you said. And that is one thing I really want to point out in this talk now. The simplex, the word simplex, comes from yeah, I use it in my last book that came out in 2024, end of 2023, Simplex Society. And in that book, I actually apply some of the wisdom that I got from the Sukuma initiations and use that Sukuma cosmology and ethics, local ethics, village ethics, as a lens to critically consider my own culture, or let's say my own society and and the global world it is part of. So from that perspective, I think I can do this because of the years of experience, even though I'm not a Sukuma. But of course, mainly it's an exercise to shift perspective and to actually think of your own society as pretty bizarre. And simplex refers to words without frame, through literally it refers to a one layer meaning, which signifies that we are using words, but they are not even rooted anymore in deeper frames, in deeper spheres, and in sources of life. I would later on explain what that is. But basically, there is very little impact of a word these days, which means that you can say about anything. This is what is happening on social media, but it's now also true by government leaders. They can actually basically say and decide, because decisions are words that you use, and then an army enacts what you say, can say, do what you want without consequences for yourself. We are in an inflation of words. So even this talk, obviously, I do not think it will make any difference, although I would want to say something about this network. What does make an what does influence is a culture. This is something I wanted to open up with. And George knows this, that I wanted to say a few words about this specific network, MAMA. One lecture or talk will not make the difference, but the build-up over years of certain people contributing and contributing one again, and forming a network, and certain assumptions which are mutually known, which are shared by the participants, not explicitly, but that makes it even more interesting because more intuitive, creates a community of speakers, a speech community, a community with different members, different backgrounds, and with that comes a culture. Even though this culture is not homogeneous, it is heterogeneous and combining different views, you have developed over time a certain ethics, you have developed over time a certain ordering of the world, knowing how different or similar ideas are amongst you. And basically, that's a powerful thing. That's the thing that has impact. And therefore, I really think that this network is important, and it would be great if something would come out of it further that you would actually intervene in some causes. I mean, there are several networks like this in the world, but this one certainly, after I guess 4 years, if I'm not wrong, and weekly meetings, has built up a tradition and a certain wisdom, knowledge. So basically, what I'm talking about with this village community is the same. It's a network of people. It doesn't have dogma, but that's important. There's no external institute saying you have to believe in spirits, otherwise you don't belong to this community. It doesn't exist. People believe what they experience, with all the positive and the negative attached to it. Positive being you're open to another person's experience. Negative being, well, if you experienced a certain thing and yeah, it has influenced you that much, there is no other source that's going to convince you. There's no Bible or scientist or whatever who's going to convince you. I've seen that spirit, or I have gone through this ritual. It healed me, and nobody can tell me anything else. So that's maybe a negative point, could also be a positive point. In any case, it goes together with the positive, open attitude that I was talking about. So that basically is a rural community in Africa. Now, when we look at the title, The Time of the Simplex, well, I explained, I'm referring to these one layered units of meaning that are being used, abused in an inflatory way. So inflation of words, words have less value as they proliferate and have no are not rooted in society to the extent that they change or have impact to such extent even that people know you have to be careful with your words. You have to watch out what you say because you're making some people very unhappy. So that reaction, knowing that words, the materiality of words is connected to affect, to impact that they have on people, and that they are again rooted, these words, in frames, perspectives of people that have grown in life, developed in life. That is my idea basically of a culture. That is actually what I study and what I studied in that society. So when I'm saying that African cultures have prevented autocracy, have prevented the rule of one person, I'm not saying that on the whole continent, all cultures have prevented that. What I'm saying is that on the continent, we have cultures, so these are African cultures on the African continent, that have prevented autocracy, that have prevented the abuse of power, and also have prevented the polarization. So that is one word against another, and people fighting with words, ideologies, opposing ideologies, without actually care about how it would affect the rest of the community. But in fact, creating this divisive atmosphere, even splitting the community, fission. This idea of fission, of splitting a community, is not taken lightly in Sukuma communities, in Sukuma culture, where everybody's counting on each other. These are farmer societies, and every helping hand is needed. So how did they actually prevent? Again, I'm saying cultures and not people. People have not prevented, I mean, individuals. There are individuals who prevented autocracy. There are other individuals who contributed to it, who actually want a dictator. So let's say there's some difference between cultures and people. Cultures is referring to a system of beliefs, norms, values, practices, established practices, which we call institutions, that altogether contribute to, I would say, rather democracy than autocracy. How? Now, before I go into details and show you a comparative study that I did, and show you a scheme where you see different types of cultures compared, some of the things that you know about chieftaincies, so chiefship, chiefs in peasant societies, in agricultural societies, are very useful here. For instance, a chief, and Tanzania was consisted mostly of chiefdoms, chiefships. Those chiefs were parallel. Some were a little bit more powerful than the other, but like let's say in the northwest where I work, you had about 50 chiefs and different clans. That's big families. Let's call them big families. Part of those chiefdoms. Those chiefs were not dictators. First of all, they had a council of courtiers, so of members of court that were called Banangoma, that represented the villages of the valley. And those courtiers, they were older than the chosen chief. Most of them had specialties like mostly in the medicinal field, protection, others in matters of agriculture, others in matters of pastoralism, because it's an agro-pastoral society, so herders and farmers, they combine the two ways of living. So in those chiefdoms, those councils played a mitigating role. They mitigated the power of the chief. They alleviated the power, the stress that could come from the chief on the rest of society. And they were specialists in Bogota, that's a Sukuma word for, let's say, medicine, which encompasses everything dealing with plants, environment, the visible and the invisible. So Bogota, when I say medicine, it includes a kind of ritual, a kind of speech, a way of dealing with a tree, with a plant, also the ingestion of a certain plant. All that belongs to Bogota. It's all medicine. We would say, yeah, but plant medicine and ritual, that those are two very different things. The one thing is medical and the other thing is religious. But we are dealing with a society that doesn't make that distinction, can see your distinction, the distinction you make, and understand it, but for them it belongs together. It's Bogota. Why? Because it's a way of dealing with the environment, the natural and social environment. So even when you're having a lot of trouble in the village, there's a lot of conflict and you don't know why, and you wonder what is all this discussion taking place, and people say there's a lot of witchcraft now in the village, then the chief can try to do something about it. It's actually his responsibility to take care of fertility so that women, men can have children, and also that there's enough rain falling so that we can have harvest. So that's the main responsibility of this chief. And if he, and sometimes she, doesn't deliver, then in the old days he was even strangled until his tears came out. And when then the rain still didn't come, he was eliminated, and he understood his connection with the ancestral spirits, those that support the rain, and that's a way of speaking, of course, was bad, was wrong, there was something wrong with it, and therefore he was no help to society. But this also means that he could never be a dictator, because he was depending on the acceptance of the people and through that council of elders. Secondly, but that went together with this council, there were divinations performed. So for a chief, for him to make a big decision, like say, this year we think the rains are going to be good, so we will plant also rice and not just maize, which is as a big consequence, because if the rains don't fall, these fields, and these are the best fields, the black soil, will not produce. So Big decisions like that together in group, he has an oracle, a diviner, several diviners, because he goes to several diviners. And this in this oracle, which is actually quite, I mean, an oracle is quite complex. I can show you how it works. One oracle can be based on on a dream, on the diviner's dream, but the most commonly one looks in, oh, I don't know if that was a bit tricky, but okay, I think you can see it. So this is the insides of a chicken actually. Aerospication or existed in Roman times, and we're talking about an old tradition in Africa, and especially that part of Africa. Those different organs, they actually have names, metaphors like the door, Luigi, etc. If you see marks on those organs, it means something. Through those organs, people check where there is power and where there is weakness in society. But also they can check by looking at the feathers and actually then identify one or the other problem and source of problem. And even sometimes people refer them to witchcraft and what ritual has to be done to remove this witchcraft. An anthropologist likes to then look at those metaphors and see where they have their pendant in structure of society, in the structure of a village, in the whole layout of a village. There's a lot of correspondence between those metaphors used in an oracle, a chicken you open up, and the actual setup of society. Now, this connection, you may say, well, what's the use of that? It's not scientific. You don't get information through a chicken about the conflicts in society. But anthropologists see with those oracles that it does have an enormous, interesting impact in the sense that it gives a chance to everybody in society to take a step back and actually give their interpretation. And by interpreting what you see, by interpreting the signs on that chicken, you actually learn a lot about each other's perspective on things. Not so there's an advantage to shifting the whole discussion about facts for a while, just freeze, not forever, but just freeze for a moment the whole discussion about facts, what did happen, what didn't happen, which is important. But freeze it for a moment and then learn about each other's perspective. One saying, I see no big problems in society. Actually, our family is doing well. And others saying, there's a lot of trouble in society. We see this and that. So people discuss their definition of the situation. And this is something that creates peace. They say mola, kupoja. Mola can be done, peace can be sustained through peaceful talk. Why? Because you don't fight each other's knowledge, you listen to each other's perspective. So this is one important thing that is possible through divination, even though the practice in itself seems like a lot of superstition. It is actually a tool being used by people to come to a kind of agreement in society. A second thing that limits the chances for autocracy by a chief is the fact that this chief is initiated. So this chief is supposed to be also a healer. And to be specific, he or she, mostly he, should be specialized in rainmaking, which is also medicine. It's rituals being done for the group. And that part, the fact that this chief has to be taught, has to be initiated, is very important because it places this beginning leader first in a role of being a pupil, being receptive, listening to the elders. The whole shift from this person being a commoner to a chief is not in terms of power, but in terms of knowledge. Making sure that this person knows what all the former previous chiefs knew, and each of the council elders has a piece of knowledge to contribute. Nobody knows everything because each of those council members received the knowledge from their father. who was a member. Those council elders are men, but the queen and specifically also the mother of the chiefs play an enormous role. Almost every chiefdom in Sukumaland and beyond has a story of basically a woman traveling, being a healer, because most healers who are mediums are female, traveling and then at some point having a dream and saying, here we will live, and then preparing her son to become a chief of that area, and then attracting a lot of people who heard like that's a good area. This son has gotten the information, the knowledge through his mother, and it's a good place to live, to stay. So this is, let's say, grosso modo, in general, the story of a chiefdom arising. Those chiefdoms, as I said, they're all rural and yeah, consisting of farmers. So the chief makes sure at the beginning of the year that the cultivation rituals are done, the ancestors are called upon. So by the time when I was there in 95, some of those chiefs returned because I have to be clear, in socialist times there were supposed to be no chiefs in Tanzania. And when I was there, I was a bit surprised. Besides the initiation that took place, I was also surprised to hear that there was a chief where I was, and another one a bit further. So I became friends with one of them, one of my area, and also the contending chief, because often colonizers intervened. They didn't want the actual chief to succeed, but they preferred somebody else to succeed, somebody that they educated. So I knew a little bit the story from both sides. In the chiefdom of Bolima, where I lived, I knew both families, and so yeah, it was actually very interesting to see, and you get to know also how their how what their attitude is to the valley, to their people. From a chief's perspective, there's a third element besides the initiation and the divination that controls, limits, mitigates the power or autocracy that he could have. Um, the third thing is more general. It's simply the fact of medicine. Simply the fact that anybody in that valley can learn magic, can learn medicine. And some people are known to be very powerful, to have a lot of medicinal knowledge, powerful, but not necessarily using it to anybody else, just becoming healers and setting up their own cult. But some people are also known, and they are therefore called witches, as being very secretive about their power and within their family actually so-called accumulating a lot of knowledge and therefore maybe one day being ready to bewitch the chief and then he would die because there's nothing to do about that knowledge of that. Because the idea is that for every magic there's a counter magic. But if you have those more secretive families that have their own knowledge and never share, you can't beat that. So the chief is very scared of that. So if he would be too autocratic, he's bound to bump into a powerful witch. This is interesting, isn't it? So medicine actually is a remedy against autocracy. You could actually call it a medicinal democracy, that those chiefdoms, because everybody in principle has the right to have and use medicine. Everybody can enter several medicinal groups. And when I was there in 95, people did that a lot. They accumulated memberships. Said, oh, that one. And the snake charmers. Then I also have a way to, an antidote when I get a snake bite, because there's quite a number of snakes living in that area. Or I can just have knowledge, to help my brother who has some mental challenge and mental illness. I can help him through by together initiating in the bourgeoisie. And so there's a whole bunch of uh, medicinal groups, memberships that allow people to accumulate knowledge and actually solve problems. In that whole story, the role of the leader, of the chief, as you imagine, is quite secondary. This person takes care of the fertility of the land and basically, but the clans, the families, they have much more knowledge and they also have their influence through the council. So they build up this knowledge, spread it or don't spread it. That is the system, this chiefship, so chieftaincy, that existed all across Tanzania before the colonizer came. There was only one kingdom which means a person who who is the paramount and has the last word in everything. That's a king. That was Shamba. That's in the neighborhood of Lushoto, northeast of Tanzania. It was just a small kingdom. That's a very specific case. But if you look at the neighboring country of Rwanda, there you had one big kingdom. That's the kingdom of Rwanda. It's called, the country is named after that big kingdom. Burundi, there was one big kingdom, Urundi, and the country is named after that kingdom. Uganda is named after Buganda, was one big kingdom, an all-powerful king, and the country is named after that. And what do we see when we compare today, those countries today? We see that in Tanzania, there's no chance for an autocratic chief. There have been attempts, maybe there's one in the past that tended towards it, but you cannot compare it to what's happening in Rwanda, for instance, or Uganda. But culturally, should not be a big surprise, because this is what those countries, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, also Congo, with the big Congo Empire, have known kingdoms. And what I did was I wrote a book after my ethnographic work, which was called Moral Power. This was basically about the power actually of women in society. Yeah, okay, as a man, talking about the power of women is a little bit bizarre, but yeah, sometimes one has to. And because that was so clear in that society, and specifically about the power, the specific type of power that people have who are falsely, of course, but who are accused of witchcraft. It's a moral power. It's another type of power than the elders who have authority, you could say. And it's another type of power than the dancers or healers or just powerful people, strategists. Moral power is an indirect form of power where you make somebody feel guilty. And this is one of the things that people who feel guilty, they say, oh, I have a witch. Somebody is giving me indirectly the feeling that I'm not worthy, that I'm a selfish person, that I should be punished. But that is also a force in society, this indirect form of power, which is called moral power. It is to say, you are not helping anybody. That the one who is bewitched, the victim who goes to a healer to be treated, typically will say, yeah, somebody in my family, and in practice it is often a woman, feels that I'm indebted to her and I didn't do well. When she asked for help, I didn't help her. And now you think of the concept of the evil eye, which is also quite universal. There is something in her gaze that I see she has a power over me. Now, whether this is true or not, the whole point is that is what this person is imagining. So this moral power is real for the people. And what I did was I compared the different forms of power in different political systems in East and Central Africa. So, and that's when this book with the same publisher came out, Berghaan. So this is from 2018, and the book is called Medicinal Rule. So it's a more historical study. It's a historical anthropology of kingship in East and Central Africa. So what I did was I looked at 40, yeah, something like that. Let me see, how many would they be? Yeah, 40. I looked at 40 groups in Africa, and I checked the ones that centralized, the ones that became kingdoms. So historically, how did that came about? How did they become kings? Those that were chiefs before. And so I'm talking about Equatorial Africa, Eastern, Central Africa, therefore. And so what I saw was that that in those kingdoms, there is a same trend. And the trend is that basically uh, the things that I just mentioned that limited autocracy are removed. So what did I mention? I said divination, I said initiation, and I also mentioned medicinal rule. Medicinal rule is my way of speaking of chiefship. I said these are medicinal rulers. They are not purely governance oriented, they're oriented on relations with the environment. So I call that medicinal. So I will go over them quickly. And for that, I have to, I don't know if I can share this, and otherwise I will just look at it. And so I took five. This specific theory hypothesis was tested separately later after that book by me, and uh, five peer reviewers went through it to check. Because of course this is a bit of a big statement I'm making, and if you have only five cases, then you can't say that this is a scientific fact. It's a tendency, you see. But it was published in our main, I guess it's our main journal, Current Anthropology, with the extensive discussion. So Rwanda, Buganda, Cuba, which is which you find southeast of Congo, Rosvi, more south, and Tio, more northwest, west of Congo. So Rosvi is actually south. Is then you actually already talk about Zambia, Botswana. You know the most of the borders in Africa are artificial, but that's why we refer to the language. So those five I checked. For the first case, Rwanda became a kingdom in around 1650, and three things were removed by the king. No more focus on the role of providence. So providence, so that power that foresees what will happen. No more oracles listened to by the king. Oracles were still done in that society, but they had no impact on the decisions of the king. And the king refused to be initiated. So that's one in 1650. What did stay was magic, the importance of magic, but a kind of monopoly by the king. So it's not medicinal rule anymore. The medicine is there, but specifically magic, but there's a strong monopoly by the king. Not the king having the magic, but the king having the main high priest. So also the concept of high priest came up, which wasn't there in the chiefship. Also importance of hierarchy and of following strict procedures. So that is Rwanda. The second case, Buganda, we're talking about around the year 1700. One of the things was that the king then, so the chief who became king and who really established the kingdom of Buganda, opposed mediumship, opposed spirits. The role of spirits were not allowed to have impact on his decisions. And also maturation. So the fact that he had to go through had to get matured in a ritual was abolished. What did stay was an altar. Again, you have or a central shrine, yeah. And a priest caste. Again, these high priests. Kuba, Kuba, a very intriguing kingdom in the southeast of Congo, the rainforest. At the time when it was first visited by British explorers, they were so impressed because of the art, because this is true for all those kingdoms. They had extensive art practices. Because they simply were so large, they had time to spend and people could do something else than farming, obviously. So in Cuba, that was very impressive. That's one of the, I think a film was made about it the first time when these British explorers came there. They said this is a civilization comparable to Europe or to the British. I mean, that was, of course, a focus in those days in the 19th century. But what you see is that in 1750, so long before those explorers came, when the uh, kingdom became a kingdom. By the way, a certain name has to be mentioned. How do we know the history of those places before the writing explorers came? Well, it's mainly thanks to myths, the myths that people continue to say, so the history that they still reproduce generation after generation in the courts. And a Belgian anthropologist, historian called Jan van Sina was, wrote books about it, and he was a professor at Wisconsin University, and he wrote amazing books about it. So he's very important. He's a key figure, of course, in this in getting to know African history of that part of Africa specifically. So the Kuba, again, surprisingly, they rejected divination. The king rejected divination and forbid the spirit cults. And instead, there was an altar and there was a kind of deity that everybody had to worship. I think it's very interesting. So the centralization of power goes together with certain religious interventions, you may say. Uh, and what they mainly do is to limit the role of spirits and make religion more predictable. Think of yeah, a process of disciplining the spirits, domesticating the spirits, having them work for the king, and a god that is predictable in his or her decisions and being the support of the autocrat, you know, being in full support, and no diviners that could question the king in name of the god. So the fourth one, Rosvi, became a kingdom around 1800. Again, you see that spirit possession, democratic spirit possession, was abolished, and that there was a territorial shrine that was invented, also a deity and high priests. And finally, the Tiu probably became a kingdom around the time that colonizers arrived there, around 1900. There you saw that also the king rejected the spirits of the forest in Kira and refused to do the initiation, lycée initiation, which he thought was too humiliating for a king. But in fact, that was the whole point of being allowed to be a leader in those African societies, was that you're able to kneel before the spirits and undergo a dangerous initiation that whose outcome is not predictable. But when it all goes well, the blessing is clear. We know that the ancestors have accepted this chief. No, instead, the Tio king had a royal shrine and had spirits working for him. So this is a little bit was a bit elaborate, I admit, but I guess it's helpful to look at those examples to at least know what I'm talking about. And now I can look back at you people. I was looking at the PDF. So we have so we are 3/4 on our way. And what I explained was that there's traditions in Equatorial Africa that have always prevented autocracy. And also polarization in the sense that words were seen as too consequential, too pregnant of meaning to be spoken lightly. So the main cause for unrest, upheaval, or conflict in those societies, when the community comes together in a village meeting, is what somebody said. So not lightly taken. What I want to do now, I forgot, can I talk 1 hour, 1 hour and a half? George?
George, let him keep on
Well,
going all day.
Thank you. I guess it's a compliment.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, we have, let's say, after 10 minutes, we can also have a discussion so that we get questions and feedback from the participants. This is all very useful for sure.
Okay, so what I would like to do, can I normally I can share, right? So I'm going to try to share to end the talk because this is we have to go back now to the concept of simplex. Is to share. Let's see. A part of that book, Simplex Society, which by the way is open access, so everybody, you're very welcome if you want to look into it and give your comments, of course. Okay, so here we have one figure I would like to discuss. I'm going to share it. I hope it will not look too overwhelming in the beginning, but once we go into it together for 5 minutes, I think it will be clear. So what can I share? Entire screen, yeah?
You should probably pick the window that has the thing you want to share in it, so you don't have
Yeah,
so you don't get in an endless loop of your image being repeated
yeah,
like two mirrors facing each other.
exactly. Now I saw that that one didn't appear, and the reason is that apparently I didn't give security clearance for Zoom, so I'm going to do that now. Modify my settings. Ah, quit and reopen. That's a tricky one. I'm not going to do that. So, okay. I should have known this.
The curse of
That,
security.
yeah, exactly. So I will just skip that scheme because it is in my head anyway. So I want to say something about the simplex. So there's a concept which I got from engineers, and this concept is simplification. So the simplex is a kind of consequence, a result of simplification. And what is simplification is not the same as simplification. With simplification, you do simplify things, but you're actually hiding the fact that you're simplifying. Okay, that sounds a bit strange. Simplification is used by engineers. Um, uh, for instance, the first time it was used was when after the Second World War, when fighter pilots had accumulated so much knowledge about a plane that they knew what could limit all possible situations when two planes approach each other or try to shoot, try to eliminate each other or even bomb on the ground. There was a number of situations they knew that always recurred. And it was sometimes the whole point of surviving in a fight was to be that quick in moving the sliders about height, wing, etc. Moving the slider so fast that you would get into that preferred position, for instance, to attack the other one. So, for instance, one where you could fall down or move up high, but at the same time get an angle of 45 degrees and then shoot. So what they did was they gave all this information to engineers, and the engineers said, "Oh, we'll replace each of those combinations of sliders and information by buttons, so that basically the and you see now when you enter an airplane, you see a lot of buttons basically, so that with a number of one button or two or so whatever, that you could get immediately the plane automatically. That's the key term, automatically in that position. So this automizing, this to make things automatic, that's what they call simplification. It is in itself it's complex because you need to know all the different positions and have to reduce them to those five, let's say, while in fact there's an almost infinite number of combinations possible with all the data and all the different mechanical instruments that you have on board. So what you do is you make a complex translation with a simplifying result. There's nothing wrong about that because that's the whole thing about engineering. That's the thing about engineering. So in itself, there's nothing wrong about it. But those pilots later on, and nowadays, definitely when you hear them, they say, well, flying ain't fun anymore. The feel of the craft is gone. Flying ain't fun anymore. The feeling of the craft is gone. It's just a few buttons, basically. I feel as a bus driver, at most, actually, because a bus driver at least still has a steering wheel. So, but it's all in the name of, the word was there, security, certainty, safety. To simplify things through complex translations, that is simplification. And basically, that's what policy does often, and what science does often. It's very complex, but it has to simplify things a little bit so that the data that come from a lab are applicable. And very often now in medicine, hospitals, you will hear from doctors, they say, yeah, well, I don't have this general knowledge anymore that my professor used to have. They will say, I'm a professor and I published 10 times more articles than he ever did, but I don't have the overview. I am specialized of the valves of the heart. And if you ask me about the pumping and the blood circulation related to the heart, go to my colleague there. And then maybe when we sit together, we'll come up with a solution. Although, to be honest, we don't even have a science that covers both knowledges because it's just knowledges next to each other. So that is knowledge that is simplicated. And in the end, you get simplexes. You just know, okay, a valve has this problem, I will have to have that operation. But you don't know anymore what the problem is rooted in, and that perhaps through some healthy life and some prevention, that specific problem can be avoided, and you don't need an operation. Don't ask doctors about diet, about prevention. They will say go to a dietist. So that's the situation which we are in our society, more and more simplicating. And actually, the point I'm making in that book, Simplex Society, is that this is true in every field of society. We've done this in everything, and it's not because we're bad, we are evil people, all of us. No, because we can't help it. Human species is not made for such a global and centralized system. You see also the kingdoms in Africa, they didn't survive long. It was thanks to the colonizers that a project bound to fail in Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda could survive because the colonizers liked it. They recognized it. Said, "Oh wow, I like this better. I like this very centralized system." You know, that's why the Belgians, they loved the Rwandese king and wanted to protect him at all costs. Up to this day, it has its impact because Westerners like simplification. And this is what a kingdom does. It takes away the divination, it takes away the initiation, it takes away the unsure factors. And what you're left with is, the certainty of the one powerful ruler that never lasts.
Thank you so much, Koen, on that excellent note. And I'm sure there will be a number of questions and discussions. Let's start with Peter.
Thank you. I refuse to go first, but I want to be at the end of the line.
Well, I don't know who will be next.
Come on, Afis.
So, Remy is there and Ngala. So start with Remy. They've got a different name, but it's okay.
It's Simon. I am on vacation, so I'm using somebody's computer.
Okay. Yeah.
So I said I can't miss this. I am so glad I attended this. Wow, Koen, you blew my mind away on many fronts. Let me begin with the notion of simplification. And then I have a question for you, though. I think, as you rightly said, we can't help it. Every stage of human advancement produces simplification. And it is a way of being in the world that overwhelms us, sort of. So even when we talk about people having general knowledge, it's a type of simplification, but more advanced. And every time we are crunching it, So that said, I'm particularly, I have some other thoughts, but I'm particularly interested in asking you, yes, you talked about the kingdoms not being that they did away with certain things, some of the rulers, and created kingdoms. I come from a very large kingdom, the Benin Kingdom in West Africa. Yeah. So, and I also see parts of what you are saying, but the monarchy is also initiated. The initiation rituals, the heir to the monarch must go through years, even before he eventually ascends the throne. But one thing I'm asking myself, could it be that it's as a result of the large territorial region of the kingdoms that eventually just naturally led to this monarchical turn to monarchies rather than city-states like in eastern Nigeria that had city-states? And you're very correct. The British did not like the city-states because they were very democratic and they had different, nuanced, complex ways of governance. And so what they did, they crushed them and created monarchies for them so that they can control them directly. So could that be the point? And later on, I will come back to the other questions I want to ask, but let me just throw this.
Thank you. Actually, when I was talking, I was thinking of West Africa, as I was also when I was writing that book, and I didn't include West Africa, just Eastern and well, mainly because I speak Bantu languages, so for me it's important that I can at least speak the language, but also because West Africa is really a different situation. The kind of I gave examples of Uganda, of Rwanda, Burundi, and I said those kingdoms would not have lasted if the colonizers didn't come at the right time. Congo Empire already collapsed even, but that was because it existed for a longer time because it was an early contact in the 16th century even. But Benin, I have to watch out what I'm saying. I'm not going to say now that it's impossible to have an autocrat like you have in the examples I gave of kings in Benin. Maybe it is, I don't know. But as you say, indeed, what's the complex dimension of those kingdoms is that they had a long history, also history, able to adapt their own centralized system. So that indeed, not coincidentally, the initiation was maybe kept or even or reinstalled. I don't know this. This is an historical detail that might be very interesting to study. So yes, that's an important caveat. It's not in itself, kingdom in itself is not a problem. It's actually the kind of centralization and the kind of kingship that gets sustained by external powers like the colonizer. Yeah, so well, yeah. So then the simplification, and I also like the remark that you made about this. There's always been simplification. So even that thing that we call general knowledge used to be in itself a simplification of something broader. And in fact, now that I think about it, this is probably in the back of my mind when I make the comparison, which is always tricky, of course, across continents, with the rural community where I do my research in northwest Tanzania, that there the simplification takes place, but yeah, is limited or is quite seen as in itself a dangerous thing. And I give you one example, the market. So to exchange between people, between villages or within a village, is needed if you want to get something, if you want to get, if you want to consume, etc. And so exchange one thing for another using money or even barter basically comes down to the same thing. But to actually only do that, just exchange, not have any partnership or relation build up over time, but just I want that, I pay money for it, I'm not interested in the person who sells it, I'm not interested in where it comes from. We are here on a market, I pay, I get it. Markets are typically located in this part of the world where I work outside the village because it's a simplification of real life. It's not it's not real life. Real life is always, even when you exchange, even if real life has capitalist aspects, it also has personal aspects and human aspects. And it helps people to then create a sphere outside everyday life to do those very simplified things. And to some extent, I would say that we can learn from this also. if we keep track of the simplifications we do, if we keep track of the choices, I mean, thinking back about the pilot, so to make sure that this pilot, at the same time as using the buttons and probably in emergent situations being happy to have the buttons, also is being taught, and normally that's what I do, I think, to live in to steer his plane, her plane, in a mechanical way, in the most basic mechanical way. And this is what I actually want to say all about schooling also, that I think this simplification, to be aware of the choices made and that there were other choices possible, always, I think is very important. I think that's what schooling should be about, to empower, to strengthen people's intuition, so that, because intuition is what? Is to see where things all come from. And this is basically what rituals do. They go back in time, you know, they remind of certain mythologies, and those things at first seem very secondary, but in fact, they bring the individual back to the very creation of culture, the sources of culture. And to be in contact with the sources is very important. This is one thing I wanted to say, but just very quickly, in that book, Simplex Society, and that's the scheme I didn't show, I speak of 3 dimensions. I say that to deal with the ecological crisis, it can be good to look at what those communities, rural communities, went through also in the past. They also went through famine, drought, and found ways to deal with it. And one of the things was that you have to, in a European context, it would be, if you want to change things, think of the decisions you make as part of a certain sphere, and it's good to re-sphere. That means we see that when in Europe, when we intervene in, we try to intervene to do something about climate change, the government makes a decision that something will be done, a certain policy will be followed, but the government doesn't follow the policy. As I said, we are in a simplex society, which means you can say things, but you don't need to do it, which used to be unthinkable 50 years ago, I think. I mean, you make a decision, you make a promise, and you follow your promise, right? No, maybe it's often or always been like this in Western politics, but in any case, so if this decision is not taken by the government, what can you do? Well, you can change sphere. You can say, we shift from the sphere of politics to the sphere of the legal. And if you're in a smaller community, this is easier. This is what they do in Europe. They went to court, and then the government has to pay every day $10,000 if they don't implement that specific policy. You shift spheres, it's possible. There are ways to deal with this very complex society that we're in, complex and simplex, because simplex refers to a specific type of complication. So, secondly, shift frame. This is what healers do. If somebody comes and says like, "Oh, I have no power, I lost all energy," this healer will ask, share me your dreams, and then this person says, "Yeah, I feel indebted to this person. I should have done that. She has a grip on my life. She lays a claim on my life. I don't know how I can survive this." Then this healer attempts through divination, rituals, etc., to make this person take a few steps back so that he or she can shift perspective and see like, well, no, from her perspective, it's different. And anyway, I have my medicine to protect myself. What am I even afraid of? So this shift of frame, I think that's also something that we don't do anymore. So that's your frame, that's my frame. Your perspective, my perspective. But the capacity of empathy, which means that you actually, for a moment, take the other's position, is now apparently very naive. I don't know why it's naive. I think it's important. And the third one, the resourcing, is to be aware of where your creativity comes from. Where do your ideas come from? That's the myths that you hear. Also the stories about your family, about your mother, about your grandmother, about your grandfather. That's where you come from. We use genes, you probably have his genes or her genes. But basically it's a very empowering idea that you're connected to a greater story, and that's resourcing. This is what those rural communities do all the time, and not just in Africa. So in fact, the weird case is the West, Europe and America. We have been through hypersimplification. We went too far somehow, and we can't find our roots back, and anybody can decide for us what our roots are. Somebody else will tell us. Some leader tells me what my roots are because I don't even know. I'm doubting. So even, and I wonder more about the next generation, those that didn't have still a connection because of the media and the complexity of communication, a connection with their roots, with their past. So anyway.
Let me just let me quickly just say this. I think that's what I want to say is this, that when you were talking earlier on, even at the beginning of your talk, and even now, you're talking about we're talking about meaning and words and all that stuff, not having meanings and the powers they used to have. I would want to say that if people were to look at our generation in the next 200 or 300 years, they will say there's an epochal shift that occurred in human civilization, and it had to do with technology, with the era of social media. But in a positive way, I want to say this, not in a negative way as people usually say it, in the sense that there is still an attachment to meaning of words, but the sphere of that ritual where it's playing out before has shifted. It's now in the domain of social media in the clouds, where new forms of communities are produced that are no longer proximate bodies in close to each other, making those interactions, those rituals of articulating and negotiating meaning. But we are still negotiating meaning through social media, building forms of community and knowing what words mean, but putting them in a different sphere. So I think what I would say, that maybe use your own narrative, or say, let us move back a bit. We are too close to the judgment of these realities. Let's move back a bit and look at how is meaning being constructed in the social media world and communities and negotiations, and how are these meanings of words impacting lives, the people who participate and share in them. I just wanted to say that, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much indeed. Ngala Beatrice, you're welcome. Ngala Beatrice, I can hardly hear you. Yeah, sorry, Ngala Beatrice, we can't hear what you are saying.
Josh, now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So I was saying that I'm right beside the road. My office is right beside the road, so we have vehicles passing. First thing, I'm called Ngala Beatrice. I'm a Cameroonian. And thank you so much for the presentation, Prof. I got a little more interested because I defended a thesis last week, a master's thesis on women's traditional secret society and peace building, which looks more like what you're narrating. So I have this. In many African contexts, we have such groups as a Sukuma. We might call it in different words and in different communities and in countries. So I specifically am dwelling here on women's traditional secret societies. So I'm asking, in the past, this women's traditional secret society in my area, they used to hold leaders accountable, and they also restored a community balance, especially during crisis. How might such individuals' knowledge or models of moral and relational accountability inform today's global efforts to prevent autocracy and political polarization? Again, the second question, with urbanization, with modernization, Christianization, I want to say that, and maybe even digitalization, what do you think about sustainability of such group like the Sokoma in the African context? Kindly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those questions. The first question, indeed, I don't know about the members of this, and I would like to know your opinions But based on the history that I know, the colonial history, in the part where I work, I would say the biggest victims of the colonizers' intervention in cosmology and the spirit world were the women. Namely, the women's impact on society has suffered most of that. Among Sukuma, Bugikulu is that society, which indeed got extinct with the colonizers and with socialist state totally finished. And it's not about socialism, it's about the post-colonial intervention, which wasn't different enough from the colonial. And maybe most of you know this, what happened in Congo with this kind of so-called authenticity, but there was no real return to the roots, the traditional roots, by, for instance, Mobutu in the then Zaire. Culture was just being used. There had been too much intervention also by the colonizers, replacing chiefs by people that fitted their strategy, etc. Too much damage done, basically, for it to easily return, except for in those societies where it stayed parallel, like in Sukuma society. But even then, the negative side is that women were more associated with witchcraft, while in fact before they had a real role to play to influence people based on their wisdom, to influence decisions in the community. Now it all had to be in hiding. And some anthropologists say, oh, but that's okay, it's another way of power, it's female power. I don't think it was like that before. It's just more of a despair in no other way to have impact, and that is through implicit means. So yeah, I think indeed there is if you want to think in a development context, women's groups, and let those women's groups not be limited to the domestic or the social or the whatever. And let them also be, I mean, combine all the functions, all the spheres, also the political. So basically, that's, I guess it's easy to answer that way. I don't know if it's all feasible, but yeah. And the second one, the second point about digitalization, yeah, that I'm really pessimist there. You know? I don't know. It's really, yeah, I don't want to share my ideas about it.
Well put.
You really don't
Thank
want
you
to
so
share
much.
your ideas?
No, because it's not going to be helpful or inspiring. Silence is better
Oh,
because I don't know.
okay.
So let's go to Ngala Beatrice. I hope you are happy with that response. All right, then,
Yes,
Peter.
Dov?
Galabeatrice, you have more to say?
Maybe should we say it later?
Okay.
Please proceed, Peter.
Gosh, I took some notes. When you spoke about hiding the factor, simplifying, surviving was to be quick and moving the sliders so fast you would get in that preferred position to attack. I have an axiom. Invention is the mother of necessity. And that is connected to the fact that most technology comes from warfare. Almost all of it, as far as I can see, not early on, but in the last several thousand years. The internet is an example of this. And when we adopt technologies that were solutions to military problems, you can see where that trends. The other thing was, let's see, all in the name of security. Often in medicine, doctors say they don't have general knowledge of their professors. I was paralyzed in 2010, temporarily, I hope. And I was taken on grand rounds because I was such an interesting case in a Boston hospital by the head of neurology at Harvard. And I had on my red smoking jacket. in my wheelchair. I couldn't move. And the doctor had 25 students from all around the world, all kinds of different colors and accents. And he had a safety pin and a whiteboard. And he poked me with the safety pin in a few places and asked a couple of questions and made some doodles on the whiteboard and said, give him a lumbar puncture and CAT scan his neck. And this is what you'll find. Well, and he was right. But so I had great faith in medicine after that. But the way he opened his talk was, he was what they call a Kiwi. He said, tist, tist, tist. All you want to do is tist. Who gave him that CAT scan when he walked into the ER? You should have your head examined. His point being that all of these doctors were being taught to use these machines to simplicate everything, to arrive at a diagnosis and treatment. And what he was saying was, you need to make your diagnosis first. You know, put your ear on the woman's stomach and listen, you know. And when you have your diagnosis, then you can make some tests to find out if you're correct or to verify some things. So that was wonderful. And I wanted to mention that I was in Benin before the war. My adolescence was in Nigeria. It only took a year for me to grow up. I hope. And I met Pete Seeger in Benin in what they call a rest house, which is, well, it's just some other kind of house on the side, but it was a bar. And here was this sweaty, tall white man in a white shirt with a very big banjo standing in the corner singing. And everybody was enthralled. They were just enraptured. And it turned out he was making his tour of Africa. He basically took his banjo and went on public transportation. He just threw himself in. And I love that. And I love that about you, that you were able to throw yourself in the deep end and take life as it came. And I just have such admiration for you. I want to be in touch because I've just written a book which is not quite published. And I want you to read it and comment on it because I might have to write it all over again. And if you say that, I will do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, Peter. And there is a question actually from Evelyn. I don't know whether, Evelyn, you are able to speak, but for the time being, let me try and read it out. That's, as an anthropologist, how do you draw the line between respecting the confidentiality of rituals and publishing information about them, especially in your case, where you are so intimately invited into the inner sanctum of the community? And maybe you'd like to respond immediately or after. Let's hear Janet, and then you can go to this question later because it's in chat. Janet, please.
Now I've all involved myself in Evelyn's question. I just want to, I want to express my appreciation. I work in peace education, so I work in forming these global networks. And so there's always this case of how you get on the same page, how, you know, and so like we will have a International Institute in Peace Education last time in Nepal, this time in Spain, before in Mexico, where we went to a indigenous village and we were trying to exchange, you know, so there's always the question. A key capacity is the ability to change frames, or like you said, spheres. I like that very much. And you never know what people mean by what they're saying. So there's always this need to make questions and to ask and to try to make a discussion that goes past the first reactions of people. And so cultivating like that. At the same time, in my neighborhood in New York City, with COVID, where everything was cut off, all the connections were cut off, even your grandchildren you couldn't see. We have a market too. And the culture of the market for our village in New York City is so important, and it keeps getting enriched with people selling things on the, artifacts on the outside and people exchanging things there. And it's really quite gives some sense of something that I have no sense of, like a village in Africa, an indigenous village, a part I was ever a part of. But yeah, so I think I could really use your writing and really learn, you have a whole bunch of different ways of saying these same things that are so important in our world now. Oh, because I'm working on an ecological relational paradigm for peace. Can't just be about war. It has to be, how do we relate and learn from and listen to our environment? And a lot of people are arguing with me that, well, what do you need relational for in there? Because it's so clear we're missing that sense of how we need each other. We can just fly about and have these conversations and write our papers, but no, we really need each other. We need to learn from people who really have still some kind of intact sense of community. And then we can share from our creation of temporary communities, how we build relationships when it's not obvious how we need each other. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Your book sounds great. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Janet. You can respond to that and also to Evelyn's question.
Thank you, George.
Right. I will. I gladly do. First, yeah, Evelyn's question is important. I guess I was a bit lucky in that sense that I first did the interview on the initiation, and the head of the society said, "Well, I can only give you certain things. I can tell you certain things which anybody can know, but the real stuff, you'll have to undergo yourself." So we only published that first, all the stuff from the interview. And I think that's the best way to go about it. I was lucky then because I had done the interview before, but because I can't say it was really a strategy, it was just things turned out well that way. But at the same time, I must say that my supervisor, he advised against me what he called going native. And to him this was going native. In the 90s, it was not done. So I actually did something that he already prohibited me to do. He said, that's the last thing you're going to do. There's two things you're not going to do. First of all, you're not going to write about witchcraft. And secondly, you're not going to go into initiation. This is because in our post-colonial days, it's not acceptable for a white person to do that anymore. But the thing was, I was a young man. I was not, he had the age that I have now. And I would probably have said in those days the same thing to my students. And at least I would have done my part of the job. I would have said, maybe I would have secretly hoped that, who knows, maybe they don't listen to me fully and they get something extra. But I would certainly say that. So I didn't listen to his advice. And afterwards, I'm happy because, yeah, a lot of that information that is forbidden has to do with something that, yeah, people take very seriously and think is important. But for anthropology is not important. Namely, it's the specific ingredients of every medicinal recipe involved, and we're talking about so many. I mean, 40 different, and it's very complex. And I did write it down, and they saw it, and they said, "Yeah, you can write it down, but never publish it." By now, I've never published. Also, later I didn't publish it. But mainly because anthropology, they're not interested in those details. They want to know what is the metaphor used, and that's no problem for them. What is the purpose? Like kupoja is to make things cool, which is another way of saying to make peace. cool mola literally means peace, coolness, peace, to make things. How do you make things cool? By going into the environment, natural environment, social environment is also involved. You go into to an area you've never been to before and get to know this forest, get to know the plants, the trees that are there. Look for their name, dream their name, the actual name, because the name you get from your family is not the actual name. The actual name you will dream, they say. So you go through this process of becoming one with the natural environment again, because also those Sukuma, they're not living in the forest. During initiation they are, and that's an important moment in their life when they get back into this cooling. They learn about this cooling process. But anyway, so those things were interesting for anthropologists. Well, the real stuff is still today not taken to be interesting. But of course, I also work together, since I will publish together with a Chouezi, a teacher, so one of these initiating teachers, about these rituals as they are today, whether they are still as whether they are sustainable, and what their use could be still today. So that's another thing. Of course, you have to work together. Besides letting them in on what you're going to publish, secondly, involve them in the publication. Citizen science, we call it these days, and I think this group is also an example of citizens that are scientists that represent a certain piece of knowledge that is important. And then, okay, so but now I went about, and because actually part of what I'm saying now I wanted to say to Janet. So yeah, it's really true. We don't know what we are saying. We think that we know, and we don't know what somebody else means. Really, I can pledge this here. I had a very good friend. I haven't seen him for a long time. He was working on his doctoral thesis, and he became depressed because he had chosen one of the darkest figures of social sciences. It's a German called Niklas Luhmann, who was trying to deal. Niklas Luhmann was trying to deal with the horror of the Holocaust, the horror of how could those intellectual Germans do this? How could the most intellectual, because they were very sophisticated, educated people who did the horror, how could they do this? And the only way he could explain this is by saying that there's a lot of unclarity when we communicate. And there's actually, we just add one misunderstanding after the other, and the more you are under stress and have to respond fast, the more understanding. And in this major mass misunderstanding, horrible things can be done without you even realizing it, because you're fully stuck in your little truth. And so this is this he told me. Dirk was his name. He told me this is. We were in a group of friends like that, and often when you have a few drinks, then he would come up with this nihilist story, and saying this. But I said, and at that time I was with my girlfriend. She went together with my. She's Annika, Swedish. We were together in field work, and we have kids, and we lived together for 25 years. And when we divorced, I must say he was right. The main thing is that after knowing each other for 25, 26 years, and having gone through everything, well, we did go apart in friendship, but we went apart because we realized that we just didn't understand each other. And I had been saying things all the time that she couldn't understand, but she pretended to understand, and vice versa. So just to keep the peace, we just nodded along and thought that we, understood each other, but we had created such a bunch of assumptions, because we never dared to think what Dirk told me all the time. There is no, you communicate, but you cannot be sure that there's understanding. You can just be open to the possibility all the time that by communicating more, there will be understanding, but it's just a possibility. Don't assume it's a certainty.
Thank you so much indeed, Koen. And slowly we are coming to the end of our session, but there was a question from Simon Mary. I don't know if Simon, you are still there, could just put it just briefly. And also there's a request if you could show us two of the books that you showed us just briefly, because we'd like to have Yes, moral power. Moral power, that's one of them. And the other one is the medicinal rule, a historical anthropology of kinship. Yeah, thank you so much. And that you said open access, so we can read them at our own.
Simplex Society is open access. The other two you can
Simplex.
find on the Ghent University website.
All right, all right. Simon, are you there?
Yeah,
Yes,
I am
please.
here. Quickly, let me just say this, Koen, I love what you just said, the last comment you made. In my own work, I have argued that the crisis we have today, especially I work in interreligious conflicts, dialogue, and interfaith encounters. And it led me to anthropological encounters, how human beings encounter, form communities, and relate, and all that stuff. So I'm very particular about listening to communication, how we produce meaning. And I have come to the conclusion that we are losing the ability to encounter. That encounter is different from speaking. It's a different level of meaning making. And it is within the domain of not rushing to judgment, just letting the underlying complexities to manifest themselves, but without moralizing these complexities and holding the tension in place. And I think that's what you are alluding to. Because I've also worked in ministry, and I worked with people, unfortunately, with people who were having crisis in their marriage, because I worked in the marriage tribunal. So I saw how they would be talking about things, and you totally realize they didn't even know each other. They didn't encounter each other throughout that marriage, but they thought they knew each other. So I think what you just said can be applied to many levels of disciplines, to say that maybe we just need to shut our mouth up, because encounter is sensual. It's the whole senses. It's not only the mouth that encounters. It's the least thing that is involved in encounter. Yeah. But because we don't want to look stupid, we want to be sophisticated, we want to come across as we know it. So we have to speak, we have to give meaning to the other. And then the meaning we are giving to the other is really destroying the other. And the other is a mystery. So the other rebels in their mystery and then moves away from the imprisonment we have created for them. And then we don't know what to do with that. But anyway, that's not a question. That's a strong affirmation of what you just said. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Simon Mary, and thank you so much, Koen. And I thank everybody else here. Maybe you've got one last point for us, Koen. No. So thank you very much indeed. And so I'm looking forward to meeting you again online next week. And so all the best for now, and goodbye.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, you can, of course, Evelyn.
Sorry, this is the post-formal. I do have a question. And